Hey, it's Jack, and this video is called, Should You Be an Independent Woman? Hey, I'm Jack, welcome to my channel. If you're new or you haven't yet subscribed, I'd love to have you with us. I release content all the time on personal growth, authenticity, dating, and new collective ways of being that might improve our society. So I'm gonna get right into today's topic. Should you be an independent woman? But before I do, let's have a quick caveat. I'm a guy, I'm a coach. I have struggled in my life. I try to share the benefit of my struggles with people if it helps. And nothing in this video is about me not wishing for you to be connected to your own guidance and intuition, which I believe is the best way of you proceeding. However, if there's something that I can share in this video that supports your inquiry, gets you closer to your truth, gets you out of a place that you've maybe felt limited or unfree or confused, then that's great. If it doesn't resonate with you, you can just click off and go elsewhere. So, should you be an independent woman? Let's put a little bit of a backstory to this. So for a long time in human culture and in many, most, if not all cultures around the world. And I'm going to be talking in gross orienting generalizations today, so you're going to find exceptions to everything I say, but I'm sort of trying to get to the 80-20 essence of something. Women have often been in a dependent role in society, right? So if you think of a situation even not that many decades ago where women weren't able to get their own lines of credit, they weren't able to get their own credit cards, weren't able to sign for their own mortgages. In many cultures still, women don't necessarily have the right to drive or to move about freely. So the solution to dependence is independence, right? Just said simply. So one of the benefits of feminism and other movements that have pushed us into this direction is that women have become more independent. And I think there's so much to be celebrated for that. In fact, there's so much that we have taken for granted, maybe who weren't the original progenitors of that movement, that we just assume a whole set of things about modern and postmodern society that a lot of people fought hard for, a lot of people even died for. Including the suffragettes and the right to vote and so on. So I'm not trying to do a history lesson. I'm just saying, if we come from a place in many and most cultures where women have been dependent, and not everything about dependence is bad. It's just saying if it's at the expense of a whole set of things that most of us with a human rights lens would say these are actually human rights for everyone, and the independence that women enjoy, I think has been net a brilliant and amazing thing that we fought for. There's ways to go. We know there's ceilings still to be broken. I think we've made substantive progress. So you don't have to be Marx to think that there might be a dialectical force that operates in development, right? We're sort of, another way of saying this is we say thesis, antithesis, synthesis, right? So it sort of means when you go to solve a problem, right? Sometimes you create a solution to the problem, but then it may also engender its own form of problem that needs to be solved at a higher level of coordination. Or in this instance, women being very independent might create some other issues, right? So what could those things be? So one of the things that you might notice is that it shifts the dynamic of the traditional way that people got into relationship, right? And again, there's going to be huge variance. I'm talking in gross orienting generalization. But in the more dependent posture, often men and women, if that's the way the relationship was happening, were playing roles that actually were mutually dependent, right? It might be that the more feminine role was more dependent in certain ways, but actually these are mutually dependent roles. Provider and homemaker, or father and mother, so on and so forth. And in breaking that, it's probably made playing those roles harder. So if you are a very independent woman, you may find it's hard to play those traditional roles. Now, you may say, well, that's great because I don't want to play those traditional roles. We may just acknowledge that there's something that might be lost in the coherence of those role playing. So in a more modern style of relationship, rather than it being, well, you occupy this role and I occupy that role, it might be, what is the sort of cost-benefit analysis of our being together, right? Maybe if we're together, we can pay down a mortgage quicker. Maybe we can have fun and travel together. Maybe we can support each other's careers. Maybe we can raise a family. Maybe we don't want to have a family. Maybe we're not at a stage of life where we would have a family. But there's sort of some sense that, maybe if we put our lives together, that the sum is hopefully greater than the parts. Otherwise, we'd probably both remain single. But that might not have quite so much cultural history and weight to it, and it may not have quite so much of the strength of that mutually dependent relationship, because it's a little bit more, almost like we're doing the pros and cons and we're weighing things up. And one of the other things that you may notice is that there's an opportunity on the other side of independence to actually move into a different style of relating. Now, the challenge with this is, for someone who's talking, and I often see these videos on YouTube, for people who are talking from a more traditional, religious, or dependent style of relating, they're going to look at what I'm about to talk about, and they won't be able to distinguish it. It's almost like it's hard to see developmentally downstream. And developmentally downstream doesn't mean better, by the way. It just means that there tends to be a direction to individuals and cultures' development. So even we might say, the language is a little guiding here, but pre-industrial cultures tend to move in the direction of industrialization, right? And we know that there are many gains of industrialization, right? Whether it's modern medicine, whether it's highways, cars, microwaves, showers, mechanization of agriculture, you could go on. But we also know there are some downsides to industrialization, right? We also know we create pollution. We might get disconnected from the more sacred or ritualistic, religious, mythic, symbolic parts of life. People may feel a sense of anomie in industrialized culture, right? Where it's like, I kind of get in my car and I drive on the road and I go to the office, and then I kind of come home and I go to my home and I kind of rinse and repeat. Maybe I don't really get to spend much time in community. Maybe I don't really get to spend so much time just valuing my beingness. Maybe I'm a bit more in the rat race. And again, there's so much that goes into this. So I'm not trying to paint the only picture. There are so many paths that people can be in, but you might get the sense of that, to the point where in many developed countries, people are now, have experienced deindustrialization, right? Where the industry tends to go elsewhere because it's, economies of scale. And also people might start to think, well, yeah, I don't want to get up and go to the office and be in a cubicle, right? That's not inspiring to me. Maybe I'm, maybe this is not even true. I was going to say maybe I'm comfortable enough financially that I feel like I can do other things, but even generations coming through that aren't comfortable financially are making decisions that, their kind of sense of connection and purpose and meaning is more important than, putting themselves in an environment that is not conducive. So if we take it out of industrialization, right? So pre-industrial, industrial, de-industrial, and we look at it in relational terms, we say dependent, independent, and then what? Do you know? Interdependent. But interdependent, from the perspective of someone who's in a dependent consciousness, might be undistinguishable. It might look the same as independent. So you don't need to worry about whether other people get it. The question is, what do you get and what's useful to you? So if you've been in your independence and maybe you found it's a little harder to cultivate relationship, or maybe you found that you've done well in your career or you've achieved those goals, but maybe in terms of community or relationship, it's not worked for you. This might be something to distinguish that, actually, is there a part of being interdependent, right, where there's a mutual dependency that actually I want to reclaim, but I'm reclaiming it from a place of already having my independence or having individuated, right? I don't know why I'm thinking of kind of geographical and political examples today, but this might be a little bit like a country that gains its independence, right? Shortly here in America, they're going to be celebrating Independence Day. But then you also might notice, and this is not to say this is universal, but Europe, for instance, you've got independent countries that have then decided in their independence that they actually want to come together in a form of interdependence, which would be one way of talking about the European Union. I'm not getting into analysis of whether it's a good or bad thing, just saying you've got these kind of independent entities that are saying, hey, if we come together around something, we think we're better off. It's not uncomplicated, but that would be the general idea. And you might find, if I can actually take my independence and my individuation, I know who I am, and now I want to regain some of that dependence where I can lean in, I can rely, I can trust, I can get support, that might actually feel better to you. You might be ready to move into that style of relating. And this, I think, transcends a lot of the conversation I see about this online, right? Where you've got maybe people in the more traditional orientation, like things like tradwise movements, who are kind of duking it off in the culture wars against feminists who are much more in this independence orientation. And there's no real way of resolving those those kind of debates and arguments, other than, I think, this kind of transcend include movement where you say, you know what, independence and dependence both have a value, right? The ability to realize we are self-sufficient and self-reliant, and we have an individual consciousness, and yet we are deeply social, and we often do better together, and then sometimes being together is also hard, and there's a tension that rubs between those things. But what you might want is an ability to move more fluidly on that polarity, right? Where, you know, maybe this weekend you're going to be super independent, right? You're going to take yourself off for a hike, you're going to hang out with your dog, you're going to make your own plans, you're going to hang out with your girlfriends, and it's really just you on your own time and you embracing your independence. And then it might be that, you know, in the coming week, you actually want to be much more in connection, and maybe you actually want someone to help and support you and actually take some leadership and maybe suggest a plan or initiate. And you get to get the benefit of both of those things, right? Whereas if you were only able to do one, you wouldn't be able to do both, right? So this interdependence is I don't know if it's having your cake and eating it, but it's a little like you get to be with more types of ways of being you. And could it just be true that there's a way of being you that is highly independent, somewhat dependent, that all those things could be possible? But you're doing the dependence not from a place of I have no way to get out of this social structure, which might have been the old way of doing independence, right? If you're like, well, I don't even have the ability to sign for a mortgage, so how could I ever really own my own home? Now you have that ability, but you might still choose, oh, I'd rather co-own a home with someone. But the way that we're kind of coming into it has a different energy, it has a different consciousness. Now, all these things create issues. It's not like interdependence is going to be some silver bullet for your life, right? And it might be that some of the gains of being independent are hard to relax on, right? That maybe there's a part of you that doesn't trust that if you let go of your independence, that you're not going to be kind of almost subsumed back into this dependent thing that didn't work for you. Or that maybe you were, you know, I don't know, maybe you had a dad who was like, you're going to be a really, you know, strong and independent young woman. And that was an important download that you got in childhood, but you've almost pursued that it's gotten you as far as it can. And now you might want to include something else that path necessarily left behind a bit. That is the way, in my experience, that development works. You often have to push off of something, right? So if you were in a very dependent orientation, let's say you came from a cultural context. Sometimes this is true of, let's say, people who are immigrating to the United States, and maybe there's still a lot of cultural context and family context of expectations around, you know, partnering and how that would look and the family's involvement. And you want to have this sort of independence. You want to say, you know what? I respect you, mom and dad, but I kind of need my space. I kind of need to do my thing. And maybe you've been doing that, but now you're like, this isn't quite as satisfying now as maybe I thought it was going to be, or maybe it was at a certain period in time. Maybe I'm sort of solidified enough in myself that I can start to reclaim things that in the past I had to push off of. And maybe it's okay for me to look at, you know, people who are in a more independent or dependent orientation, and actually I don't have to make them wrong, right? I can sort of be with more things. That to me is the essence of at least one strain of our development. You know, I sometimes call it inner freedom or frictionless reality, that you can be with more things. You still have preferences, but you may be able to look at different things and say, okay, that's cool. I get why people are like that, or I get why they do that, or it's cool that you do that. It doesn't quite feel like it's for me, right? That's the difference between discernment and judgment. I'm not judging you. I don't think it's quite right for me, but all the power to you. That's a good place to live your life from. Right? It just generally, in my experience and clients' experience, it just feels better when you judge fewer things, you can understand and include more things, and then you have your own discernment. So let me get to the final point of what I want to say in this video, which is, what is the extent of your authentic independence? That's the question I want you to sit with. If your independence is authentic in that, yeah, we're all going to be somewhere on a spectrum. Some people are authentically highly independent. You know, if we say to them, hey, you want to go, you know, climb Kilimanjaro kind of on your own or with a bunch of random people you don't know, for some people that's like, yeah, hell yeah. For some people that sounds like the last thing they'd want to do, right? And that's just one example around hiking. You know, for some people, the notion of, hey, you've got a week all to yourself. Some people might be like, wow, that's amazing. I love that. Gosh, I feel relaxed and peaceful. I'm going to do some yoga. I'm going to read. I'm going to be spontaneous. I'm going to catch up on binge watch some shows. For some people, the notion of a week that was kind of just left to them, that might sound very empty and unmeaningful, right? So We're all over this spectrum, but wherever you are authentically, I think that's the real question. And sometimes people's independence is a not self strategy, right? It is a coping mechanism, an adaptive strategy to some things that happened often in childhood or early romantic relating. And I'm not making that wrong, right? Sometimes within the wound and the gift, it's all there, right? So, even just this week, I was speaking to someone who was saying, yeah, they had a really rough childhood and they had to go out and stake a claim in the world because no one was coming to help and they didn't want to recreate the poverty that they experienced. And that's power, that's empowering, right? But when you know that you've got to hustle and survive and make it in the world on your own, off your own bat, you often develop a whole set of other behaviors to make that happen, right? So it's not easy to then trust or relax or just value your own beingness because you're like, no, I got to go make it happen. And so in the same way, your independence could be in part, and it probably isn't in whole, but in part, a response to childhood where you were like, oh, I can't rely on, the community, mom, dad, my siblings. Or when I do that, I notice I get kind of clipped, right? So maybe if I'm too dependent, it really compromises my freedom and my essence has some freedom in it. And so I've learned to not be enmeshed with people, but then perhaps I pay a price when it comes to intimacy. Because actually I do want to be closer to people, and it's not easy to be this independent person and still be close to people. Now, everyone is figuring this out to some extent, right? I don't think anyone just has a super easy, I just moved from being autonomous to in connection. I can easily be dependent, independent, interdependent. I just got it going on. Show me that person, right? We're all failing, we're all trying, we're all kind of probably mucking it up, we all don't really understand. All of that's welcome. I'm just trying to say, if your independence, if you just really could slow it down, and sometimes there might be some grief and loss that comes up if you really get in touch with this, if you realize your independence is costing you intimacy, or your independence is a way of dealing with the difficult people of life, which includes you and me, but everyone's difficult in some ways. If you've learned, well, actually, yeah, because if I get close, I don't know, mom was kind of crazy or dad was alcoholic and unpredictable, and good on you if you've found a strategy that allowed you to survive that, right? And if that strategy was called hyper independence, good on you, right? You figured that out. And I'm sure that took a lot of, energy, pain, hustle, diligence, showing up when other people seemed like they had an easier path and you had to work a lot harder for something. Good on you. And I just want to say, if that's true for you, I also think you deserve the opportunity to have more closeness and intimacy and dependence in this interdependent framework, if that's true for you. And if it's not, that's also great, right? There's no hard sell here. It's just saying, if you notice, yeah, part of my independence feels good to me because, yeah, I do like, going on a solo trip to Europe, or I do like, hiking in the backcountry, or I do like, being the master of my fate, having my own business, or being a boss girl, or any of those things. Great. And if it's also true that sometimes you notice you kind of unconsciously, maybe you push people away, you keep them at a distance, you tend to de-escalate intimacy after a connection or a date, or you don't acknowledge that in that kind of maybe harder independent exterior is this softer shell of you that wants to be able to relax with someone and maybe have someone take care of you at times. I'm saying to you, I don't think it's any failing to get curious and be in that inquiry, and there's a strength in that vulnerability, and let's get you more of what's true to you, right? If what's true is you like, yeah, you know what? Most of the time I do want to be pretty independent, but actually sometimes I would love for, let's say I'm a woman that dates men, I'd love for a guy to actually be taking care of me, and not in a way that creates dependence, right? I don't want him to be the only one that can, manage the finances and kind of control me through that. But actually that sort of sense of like, oh yeah, someone's got it and I can kind of chill out a bit. For many of you, that will feel good if it's someone that you like being in that kind of orientation to. And for many of you, it will also bring some stuff up. So it's not like, oh, cool, yeah, I just get to relax. It's like, can I relax? But part of me feels vigilant. Like, is he gonna F it up? Is he gonna take advantage? Is he watching here? Does he know what's going on? Is he tracking? Is he, that's part of the challenge of a path of personal growth, right? Is you're gonna have to be with those edges. You might have to communicate, hey, I notice I would love to trust you on this, but my trust has been activated. And so I'm just letting you know, I don't feel super trusting right now, but I'm not blaming you for that. I know that's something that can happen for me, and I wanted to be revealed about it. I don't need to do anything about it. I'm just letting you know. Right now, if you could do this little thing, that would actually help me just relax my vigilance, right? If you could just give me 5 minutes of your undivided attention, right? If you could just confirm to me that you did book the holiday that we talked about 2 weeks ago. I've been kind of tracking it. I don't know. I didn't hear from you. What we don't want is that your protector and controller persona kind of disavows the part of you that wants that more interdependent and just sort of pretends that you're only independent and strong, and then you miss out on the intimacy. And then you also might miss out, if we put this into the language that's used a lot on YouTube around masculine and feminine, which, I actually think is much more nuanced than most people make it. I think there's, a range of these energies in most people, and we're not trying to be a perfect model of masculinity or femininity. I think that is it's an unconscious identification that I think some people teach from, but we could get into it. More trying to say, if you want to experience more of your feminine essence, right, which is maybe includes a part of you that is a little bit more, I want to be taken care of rather than be the person who's taking care, then this might be one way to achieve it. That actually, you get in some of your interdependence where you can still be independent, but you can also allow that more vulnerable in some ways part of you come forward. You might find that it shifts something in a dating dynamic. You might find that you are getting more initiation from a guy when he can feel that part of you more easily, right? And it's not to say that it needs to be available. Like, none of this is you should. This is all like, if you want to, if it feels true for you, if it would be more authentic for you, if this would be a good line of practice and development for you, then you might experiment with, do you like it when that part of you is a little bit more available? Because it often activates in a masculine essenced man, or someone who has a more masculine essence, it activates something to be able to, respond to that energy and, feel the part of someone who's not just an island, right? Which obviously no one is completely an island, but some of us have an island strategy, which is an important strategy. I'm glad that they're islands. Islands, there's a lot that's great about being an island. You create breakthroughs, I think. You can be more self-reliant. I think it is a culturally or societally adaptive strategy that we have some of us that have that. So I don't like to make these things wrong. I like to say, how do you take the hand that you were dealt? How do you take the constellation of wounds, essence, defense that we all are and play it, right? Play it in a way that gets you more of what you want. So dependent, independent, interdependent. Does that make sense to you? Leave me a comment. I'd love to know your experience. I'd love to know if you're making sense. You can push back, right? Keep it polite. That's my only request. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please subscribe. If you want to know more about real freedom, click the first link beneath this video. It'll take you to my free guide. Maybe it will take you 15 minutes to get the essence of that. I think it's some good writing. I've got great feedback on it. So that'll be the first link, is the Real Freedom Guide. And as always, I'm Jack. Thanks for being here.